In this episode, you'll discover the root causes that drive chronic and terminal illness and walk away with the clarity and direction you need to address those root causes today. You've been told it's incurable, but here at Renegade Remission, we believe in rewriting the story. If you're facing a terminal or chronic illness, you are not alone. I'm Eleni Welch, certified nutritionist, and each week I share healing strategies and remission stories to help you take control of your health, feel better, and rediscover hope. Welcome back to Renegade Remission. In this episode, you'll discover the common biological drivers behind chronic and terminal illness, and you'll learn why understanding those root causes changes the way you approach healing, can help you focus your energy on what actually moves the needle instead of chasing endless strategies, and hear a real documented recovery story that shows what can happen when underlying burdens like inflammation and metabolic strain are addressed. When you're diagnosed with something serious, whether it's cancer, heart disease, ALS, autoimmune illness, MS, neurodegeneration, or a chronic condition nobody can fully explain, you're usually given a label. Sometimes you're given a treatment plan. Sometimes you're given a prognosis. What most people are not given is a deeper map to why the body became vulnerable in the first place, what burdens were quietly accumulating for years, and whether addressing those burdens can still matter now. And this is where the idea of root causes can be deeply relieving because it shifts the conversation away from focusing on just the diagnosis and moves it back towards the internal environment in which that diagnosis developed. Across many fields, immunology, cardiology, neurology, endocrinology, gerontology, researchers keep circling back to a familiar truth, which is that illnesses may land in different organs and look like different diseases, but the body often struggles under the same handful of upstream pressures. And understanding these pressures isn't about blame, it's about making sense of what you're experiencing and finding places where the body can still be supported and healing can happen. Before we begin to break down those root causes, I want to begin with a real story that illustrates what can happen when a person reduces multiple biological burdens at once. This is a case report of heart failure improvement after reducing multiple root burdens, including diet, inflammation, and gut dysbiosis. A published case report in the Journal of Geriatric Cardiology described a 79-year-old man who came in with worsening shortness of breath and markedly reduced exercise tolerance. Workup revealed 3-vessel coronary artery disease and left ventricular systolic dysfunction with an ejection fraction of 35%. Along with significant valve disease. He was advised to pursue major cardiac surgery, but he declined and instead enrolled in a monitored program supporting a whole food diet, described in the paper as including vegetables, fruits, whole grains, potatoes, legumes, and nuts, and excluding sugars, overly processed foods, and conventionally raised animal products. What's striking is what happened next. Over the ensuing weeks to months, the case report describes meaningful improvements in his weight and lipid profile, and most importantly, his functional capacity. The paper reports that the man regained the ability to walk long distances without shortness of breath, and on a follow-up echocardiogram, his ejection fraction increased to 50%. The authors explicitly highlight the temporal association and discuss plausible mechanisms, including reductions in oxidative stress and inflammation, and changes in gut-derived metabolites linked to vascular inflammation, like TMAO. It's important to understand that this is not necessarily a dietary template that fits everyone, but it is a real documented example of what we mean by root causes. The diagnosis was heart failure. The upstream burdens included inflammatory load, vascular injury, and physiology shaped by diet and lifestyle. And when some of those pressures were reduced, the body showed more capacity than the doctors originally predicted. Now let's talk about what those upstream burdens often are across all diagnoses. The first is chronic inflammation, which is sort of when the alarm system of our body never fully turns off. Inflammation is definitely not our enemy. In a healthy body, it's a short-lived, intelligent protection system activated to fight infection, repair injury, and restore balance. The problem is when inflammation becomes chronic, like a smoke alarm that keeps going off day and night until the nervous system, immune system, and tissues are exhausted. A widely cited framework paper in Nature Medicine argues that chronic inflammation is deeply intertwined with many major disease categories of cardiometabolic disease, neurodegeneration, cancer risk, and immune dysfunctions. because persistent inflammatory signaling reshapes gene expression patterns, impairs tissue repair, and disrupts immune accuracy. I'm not meaning to imply that inflammation is the single cause of everything, but it does mean that reducing inflammatory load often changes the internal environment in a significant way that can make the body more resilient, sometimes dramatically. The second root cause of chronic and terminal illness is mitochondrial dysfunction, which is when cells can't generate enough usable energy to repair. Anybody who's taken a regular biology class is probably familiar with the term that mitochondria are the powerhouses of the cell. But mitochondria aren't just energy factories. They're also deeply involved in cellular signaling and communication, oxidative stress balance, and the capacity to recover from biological strain. When mitochondrial function declines, people often experience the very symptoms that make illness feel unbearable: fatigue, low stress tolerance, poor repair capacity, and reduced energy reserves. Mitochondrial dysfunction shows up across a wide range of diseases: neurologic, metabolic, cardiovascular, and degenerative. But mitochondria are not static. They respond to environmental inputs like nutrients, sleep, metabolic state, and inflammatory load. So when we talk about supporting healing, we're often talking about restoring the body's cellular ability to produce energy efficiently enough to repair. The third root cause that drives chronic and terminal illness is gut microbiome imbalance. The gut is one of the body's main interfaces with the outside world, and the microbiome helps shape immune tolerance, inflammatory signaling, metabolism, and even aspects of brain function. When the gut ecosystem is disrupted, whether it's by diet shifts, infection, medications, chronic stress, or illness itself, the immune system can become either overreactive or under-responsive. A clinical review by Schreiner and colleagues outlines how dysbiosis, which is an imbalance in the gut microbiome, can interact with immune regulation and inflammatory disease processes, which is one reason gut support often creates improvements that seem unrelated on paper: improvements in our energy, pain, skin, mood, immune stability. The fourth root cause of chronic and terminal illness is environmental burden and cumulative exposures, which is when the total toxic load exceeds the body's ability to buffer it. We live in an era where cumulative exposure, air pollution, industrial chemicals, endocrine disruptors, heavy metals, occupational solvents, has become a serious public health issue. The question is never if we're exposed, it's what is our total load over time, and how much capacity does our body have to buffer and eliminate what it encounters. The Lancet Commission on Pollution and Health has found large-scale evidence linking pollution exposure to major disease burden worldwide, including cardiovascular and respiratory disease, as well as cancer and neurodegenerative diseases and other downstream impacts, such as fertility. We don't need to be afraid of the modern world, but we do need to work on reducing unnecessary exposures when we can, because lowering that toxic load often creates physiological relief. The fifth driver across disease is chronic stress. I think we all know this one pretty well by now. When people hear stress, they sometimes assume we're talking about mindset, positivity, or coping skills. But in physiology, chronic stress is a body-wide signaling state that changes immune function, inflammatory tone, sleep quality, glucose regulation, digestion, and even gene expression patterns over time. Researchers have described how the brain and body adapt to stress and how chronic, repeated activation creates cumulative wear and tear, often discussed as allostatic load, that can shape disease vulnerability. This is why nervous system support is often part of the biological foundation that allows other interventions, such as nutrition, movement, supplements, and treatments, to work better. The sixth driver across chronic and terminal illness is metabolic dysfunction. Blood sugar instability and insulin resistance as inflammatory amplifiers. Metabolism is not only about weight, it's about how the body handles fuel, how stable blood sugar is across the day, and how much inflammatory signaling is created by repeated spikes and crashes of that blood sugar. Insulin resistance, in particular, interacts with inflammation in both directions. Each one can worsen the other, and it acts in a vicious circle. Inflammatory pathways and metabolic disorders are tightly connected, which is why metabolic stability is often a lever for improving inflammatory burden and overall resistance. The seventh common driver across chronic and terminal illness is persistent immune triggers and latent infections. The immune system can be kept busy even when you don't feel acutely sick. Many humans have chronic viruses, bacterial infections, and parasitic infections. The relevant question is whether rather, the immune system is locked into a chronic activation pattern that keeps inflammatory signaling elevated and recovery capacity lower. If the immune system is switched on all the time, it becomes tired and worn out, more likely to make mistakes, and less able to handle new burdens that are thrown at it. Viral infection, bacterial infection, parasitic infection, all of these things can shape immune function and disease processes over time. This is by no means an exhaustive list of the factors that drive disease, but they are the most common ones. So if any of these seem like they describe your personal situation, it's worth evaluating them. If all you were given was the label of a diagnosis, then I want to be really clear about something. That diagnosis, that label, is not a full explanation of your biology, and it's not the full story of your future. Addressing these root causes that we've talked about today doesn't necessarily erase the need for medical care. Sometimes medical care is essential and life-saving, but it can give you something powerful. Places where your body's burden can be reduced, where resilience can be rebuilt, and where the internal environment can become more supportive of repair. You don't need to do everything all at once. Most people improve because they can identify the biggest burdens and start gently reducing them in a way their body can actually tolerate. If you want a simpler way to apply this without becoming overwhelmed, think in terms of lightening the load rather than perfecting everything. Pick one area and begin. You might start by choosing one daily anti-inflammatory meal that feels doable, nutritious, and delicious to you. Nutrition is one of the fastest ways to alter inflammatory tone. Or you might start with blood sugar stability, simply pairing carbohydrates with protein and fat and eating more consistently so your body isn't riding a glucose roller coaster. Maybe you start with one small nervous system stabilizer, slow exhale breathing, a short prayer practice, a gentle walk outdoors, understanding that stress physiology affects every system downstream. And if environmental burden feels like a meaningful piece for you, you might pick one exposure to reduce this month, whether it's adding in a whole house water filter, removing fragranced or scented products from your skincare lineup, swapping a more conventional cleaning product for a more natural one. These small changes add up. Your illness does not come from one cause, it comes from many small burdens accumulating over time. Some are visible and tangible, and many are invisible and difficult to perceive. And healing very often comes in the same way. Many small supports that reduce the load and give the body more room to do what it was designed to do. Addressing these root causes can add clarity, and clarity is powerful because it gives you direction, even when the original diagnosis made it feel like there was none. In our following episodes, we'll discuss some lifestyle changes that can support healing across all diseases, so stay tuned for that episode, and until then, go be renegades.